For a technical illustration, or really for anything that you want to represent visually, the movement of the eye defines whether you're going to hold the attention of your audience and whether they're going to pay attention to what you're trying to say. The general principle is that you have to guide your audience where to look in your figure without actually being there on their side to guide them. Let me explain this using an example. So this time we're going to take a look at a positive example first so that you can understand what I mean. So if you look at this figure without even having to understand what it's trying to say, there are no captions, there are no explanations, but even without having any understanding of it, you're going to almost immediately know where to start looking at, right? So you can see that these are arrows. So even if your eye goes to some point over here, you are still going to be drawn back along these arrows and over to this red dot over here. Typically, in the English speaking world, or people who are familiar with English, their eye is going to go to the top left automatically because that is where the content typically starts from. Okay, so that's true for a large part of the world. Even if that is not the case, your arrows, which are spread throughout this figure, basically lead you back over here without you having to consciously think about where to start. Once you're there, you have a very clear direction of where to go. So you have this box over here, you take a look at it, then you have an arrow pointing you to the next thing that you have to look at, right? So this component, you're going to take a look at it, and then you have another arrow and you have another arrow. By the time you get to the end of the line, now you need guideline about where to go next. And there's a very large, very prominent red colored arrow telling you that you have to go over here and not over here. Okay, so that is what I mean by flow. Your eye is going to flow very naturally from over here and then over here, and it's going to arrive over here, and by the time you get to the bottom right, you know that you have taken a look at all the components of this figure or of this illustration, and you're done. So you have communicated everything that you wanted to do. Remember this basic principle. You have to guide the audience, and you have to make sure that everything that you want to draw the attention to, the eye or the flow of the eye, hits that somewhere along the line. Okay, so that is the general principle. Now it's not very difficult to do this if you're consciously thinking about your figures. So let's do a couple of examples, and then I'll tell you how you can approach this in a mechanical manner so that you can always ensure that the flow of the movement is fine in your figures. Okay, so let's take a look at another example which is sort of okay but not that great. So these are all my own figures. I've matured over the years, and some of the figures are not that great, so I can always look back and reflect on my own mistakes and try to improve them. So this figure, again, it has some arrows pointing in certain directions, but there is no clear starting point. So if we assume the English speaking metaphor, we can go to the top left. So we have a user over here, fine. We have a clear direction of where to go next. So we can go to contacts, notes, and messages, and all three of these point me to my application. So once I'm here, now this is a problematic point. Here I have one arrow going out, but I have three arrows coming in, and I have not been to the location where these arrows are coming in from. So subconsciously, my mind has trouble trying to understand whether I should first go ahead and look at this portion over here and try to understand this so that I can understand why these arrows are coming in. Or another option that I have is to follow the logical chain and just try to see where it goes. So if I go over there, I'll come over here, and then I go here and here. Now I'm back to the application. But the problem is now I am back to where I started from, and my eye subconsciously, remember this is not your audience consciously trying to figure out where to look. This is what happens subconsciously. They're not thinking about it. I have failed to guide them where to go in this figure. So this portion over here, this is now all left, right? And now the audience is likely to just leave the figure and move on, and I will have missed the opportunity to communicate this information to them. So let me draw this again. The flow would be, you go from over here, here, and you're done. And then you move on. This is what we don't want, right? So we'll get to an example of how we can cater to this. But let's take a couple more examples. This is an example of flow done really right. So starting from the top left again, we have a clear direction of where to go. So we go down and we go up. At any point in time, we have one direction to go over there, but it's not a very long path. I can go over there, I can see that this is the literature review, and because I have nowhere else to go, my eye comes back. If the audience is paying attention and they're looking for details, they go over there, come back, go over here, back, here, and back, here, and back, here, and back, here, back, and so on and so forth. So it's working really well, and you get to the end of the figure without having to stop and think about where you should look next. This is the ideal situation. I understand that it's not always possible to do it like this. This figure lent itself to being drawn in a very good flow. However, there are some cases in which you have such a complex flow that it's not possible to draw it so visually cleanly. So here's how we can handle some of those cases by using some helpers in our figures. So let's take a look at an example of that. So this figure over here, it's quite complicated. And as you can see, there are a lot of components over here. Again, you don't have to understand what the figure is trying to communicate. We're just trying to take a look at the flow. So we start from the top left and we have a clear direction of going down. We have this arrow coming in, but we don't have to worry about this arrow right now because immediately below the application, we have a 1. So we have these helper annotations within our figure, which are telling us where to look. So because we have these 1, 2, 3, 4, we have a clear indication of where we should look next. So 1 and then 2 and then 3. And then here we know that we should not be going down because we have a 4 over here. So it's very clear where to go, right? So there is a problem here. I hope you can see it. If not, we'll get to it in a minute. So we have 4 and then you go over here. Here you have again a choice of whether I should go up or down, but that choice is very easily solved using the numbers that are given to us. So 6, we have 7, we come back over here, and even though there is a jump here, but we know that this is going to be the next arrow because we have the number there. So it's very easy. Okay. So then we have from the policy evaluation engine 9s, and then we have 10s and 11, and we're done. Now, what's the problem? The problem is that you can see 2 things which are still missing. Oh, actually 3. So we have this guy over here, we have this guy, and we have this guy. These 3 have been missed in our flow. So we went from 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, and these 3 were missed out. So here's how you deal with this. If you have a figure which has some components which cannot be fit in the flow, you do the flow, you fit as many components as you can in your flow, and whatever is left out, if it's not that important, you can just leave it out. It can be thought of as ornaments. But if it is important, what you do is you make it visually distinct from the rest of the figure. So for instance, this device is visually distinct from everything else that has been seen up until this point. So these have all been very bland boxes or very plain boxes, and this guy is an icon. So your eye is automatically drawn to it. Similarly, the user is drawn in a visually different style from the rest of the stuff. So your eye is automatically going to be drawn to it. Okay. And once you arrive at the user, you can see that there are options that user can follow. So the user can install, can set, can specify, or can approve the manifest file, and the manifest file is now linked to the user. So we have covered everything. So start with the flow. If there are ambiguities, you can put annotations on them, very clear annotations, so that the audience can understand where they should look. If some components are missed out, you can put visually distinct elements within that so that the eye is drawn to those as well. Okay, so that was a positive example. Let me give you another negative example which I really don't like. So I drew this a while back. Visually, it's not all that bad. It has the alignment and stuff pretty fine. But the problem is you start from over here, you go here, and now you have no idea where to go. And you can probably go over there and then come back and then go here, and it's just too complicated. Too much is going on, right? So this is an example of how not to do a good flow. Even though there are arrows, but these arrows are not really guiding me where to go. Things are just too jumbled up together. Plus, there is another problem that we saw earlier on in the course. These arrows are not connected properly to the boxes that they're trying to connect. Maybe I should have just curved this arrow over here like that and curved this arrow over here like that. But a lot of stuff is wrong with this figure, even though visually it doesn't look all that bad. Okay. So to sum it up, here's how you go about deciding on the flow of your figure. First, and this is really, really important. First, you sit down, take a piece of paper and draw what you're trying to communicate, like a very, very rough draft of what you're trying to put in your illustration. So for instance, we can have a box over here. and this is our component 1, right? We know that this component is going to communicate with our second component, so this guy over here, so D. It can be as ugly as this, right? It doesn't have to be neat at all. In fact, it's recommended that you don't try to make it neat. Just put the stuff down and figure out whether things flow properly. So this is going to communicate probably with another component which is going to be very large, and this is going to be C29, whatever that is. And then this communicates with 1, 2, 3, and 4 different components, and these are this guy and this guy and this guy and this guy, and this guy in turn communicates with this over here. So you put this stuff down and then figure out whether everything is connected. If not, you try to put annotations on top of it. If even that doesn't work, you try to redraw it. So maybe we can take these and move them around somehow so that they are not equal. The most important thing is drawn first, and then the second, and then the third. For instance, if we have these, so if you want to follow this path first, you draw this guy first, and then you come back, and then you go slightly away from the C29 box, right? So just this very simple differentiation of space tells your audience that this guy comes first and this guy comes second. So you can think of these things almost on your own once you start drawing them on paper, right? So this is going to come in handy. Let me give you a brief summary of the checklist that you should have. So you start off with a rough sketch, 10 minutes max, right? So doesn't matter how complicated your figure is, just don't spend a lot of time on it. Do it really quickly. Draw a flow curve on top of it. So for instance, if you have this, you go ahead and draw a flow curve which shows you where you want the eye to go to, right? If it doesn't work out, try to fix it, okay? Identify which elements have been missed. For instance, we had the user guy missed in one of the previous case studies, and then find a way of including those remaining parts. Either make them visually different or try to put some annotation on top of that. Try to brainstorm this, and if you have some specific case studies, you can always put them in the comments and we can discuss on that in detail. Add flow numbers if it's necessary. And last but not least, it's very important to give space to elements so that they can breathe, right? So what this means is you should not cramp things together too much. So for instance, even if you have a lot of stuff going on in your figure, you should still have spaces around your different components so that they can be distinguished from one another. You don't squish everything together, right? That is very important. And this is one of those things which is difficult to follow unless you've seen some really good examples. So in the next video, I'm going to give you a couple of recommendations of my personal style that I really like, and I've seen that it works really well with a wide audience. And if you follow those, they might be useful, but they're really just my recommendations and something that I've seen work really well. So let's do that in the next video.